Hello, this is how to install the OpenSSH server on Windows 11. This is a Windows 11 Pro computer. I searched on Google Windows 11 Pro how to enable SSH server. This is the result that I wanted. In here I need to select the operating system, which is Windows 11. It tells me that there is already a OpenSSH feature inside Windows, which we'll need to enable. So let's follow this tutorial. From the Start menu, I need to search for optional features. Okay. I don't see the OpenSSH feature already enabled, so at the top right, there's this button, View Features. I have accepted the UAC user account control prompt. I have the OpenSSH client that I also will need. I don't have a OpenSSH server feature, but then I don't also have a button to add features, which makes me think that this is the UI that shows the actually installed features where you can remove them. So I'm going to uncheck the OpenSSH client because it's probably installed, because the only button that becomes available when I enable the OpenSSH client is the remove button. So let's hope that the OpenSSH client part is pre-installed already. At the top we have this button, see available features. And in here we will look for the OpenSSH server. And here it is. If I select it, then I have the add button. So the tutorial from Microsoft is wrong. The UI in Windows 11 has evolved, and the steps in the tutorial are for an older version of Windows 11. Okay, so hopefully I have the OpenSSH client pre-installed. Right now I'm installing, adding the feature for OpenSSH server. I have checked it. I'm pressing the add button. Thank you for subscribing, joining, and helping this YouTube channel. The OpenSSH server feature has been added. It took almost 10 minutes. The UI is also very interesting. It shows this progress bar after the feature has been successfully installed, which is not that great. But we can determine that the feature has been installed because it says in here added, not some other progress text. And then the added features will show the feature being installed, OpenSSH server, and the available features, which is the UI to add features, now doesn't have the OpenSSH server. At letter O, it's sorted alphabetically. So with this, we have installed both features that we care about, the OpenSSH server and client. We should continue to the next step, which says that we should go inside services.msc and enable the OpenSSH SSH server if it's not already. So let's do that. I'm going to hide this panel, which is this button, Show Hide Console Tree, to have more room for the actual content of services.msc. We're going to search for Open. So there's the OpenSSH server manual and the authentication agent for connecting using SSH pairs of key private public is set to disabled. I'm going to only connect using a password, so I'm going to only enable this service, Windows service, which is called SSHD and display name OpenSSH SSH Server. As it says in here, so double click on SSH, OpenSSH SSH Server, and we want to change in the General tab the startup type from manual to automatic. Apply, and we're also going to start it at the same time, which is this step 6. Okay, so with this, the SSH server should be running. Let's prove that it's actually running. Let's get an elevated terminal. So I right click on the Windows Start menu and select this option, Terminal Admin. Your option might be different, might be Command Prompt Admin, and PowerShell has started automatically, which I don't really use. I'm going to switch to cmd.exe. Clear screen. And let's prove that the OpenSSH server has actually started. Hopefully netstat is available. Netstat minus NOBP TCP. So TCP is the protocol. Netstat is the command line executable that's showing the TCP and UDP ports. We're looking for the TCP port 22. We can see it on the very first line here, which says that on IPv4 address 0.0.0.0, which means all network interface cards with IPv4 address, which is what we want. We want both the local loopback device, the localhost 127.0.0.1, and on the actual real Ethernet network interface card, the OpenSSH server should be listening to on TCP port 22. Next up, we should follow the tutorial where we're instructed that the OpenSSH server is actually listening for incoming connection, so it's serving a TCP server, which means that we'll need to manage the Windows firewall. Okay, let's go to the Windows firewall with advanced security and select one of the two possibilities. Either we disable all of the profiles, so there's 3 profiles: domain profile, private profile, public profile, which you do by clicking on Windows Defender Firewall Properties, and then on each of the first 3 tabs, on firewall state, you select off, and then you press apply. Private off, apply. Public off, apply. This is an alternative that's actually what I should prefer, because this Windows 11 Pro installation is a virtual machine, is running on my computer. It's not accessible from the internet, sits behind a NAT gateway, so it cannot be abused and used from the wider internet. But in case you want to keep the Windows Firewall enabled, let's look at the inbound rules. And in there should be a rule for OpenSSH -server -in -TCP. Let's sort the rules by name ascending. I went to the O letter, so sorted alphabetically, O letter. There's just one rule, which is called OpenSSH SSH Server SSHD. Let's see how the rule looks like. So maybe the name has changed. In the tutorial, another Windows Firewall rule name is being shown. And it's inbound, SSHD enabled. Hopefully it's for the TCP port. No, it's for the entire SSHD.exe process. Okay, system root is probably /Windows and then /system32. This is a Windows 64-bit installation. So there is the actual directory /Windows /system32 where 64-bit executables, DLLs, etc., which are part of the Windows operating system reside. There's an entire directory for OpenSSH, open source project, and then inside there's the SSHD executable. Let's actually go there and look. So I'm opening Windows Explorer, the file manager. I'm navigating to /Windows /system32 /OpenSSH directory. There's a number of executables, as we would expect. There's SSH, which is the SSH client. There's SSHD, which is the OpenSSH server. And the other helpers, including the SCP, SFTP servers. So it looks okay. Again, the Windows firewall rule is not by TCP port, but by executable. Hopefully. It still says port TCP22 in here, but it's disabled. Okay, next up we want to actually test connecting to localhost. So let's see if we have the SSH client. So SSH. It's where we expected. Let's see if the command line parameters are the same as in Linux. Okay, so /? Does not work, which is the usual command line parameter for Windows executables, but then --help does work, which is usual for GNU style open source executables. Okay, let's look at the suggested command line. So SSH domain /username @server name. Let's first just go SSH localhost, which should work. It should pre-select my identity, my local Windows user account as the user that wants to connect. And then it has selected localhost. It didn't select the localhost that I wanted, so it didn't select the IPv4 127.0.0.1. It actually preferred the IPv6 version, which is ::1. But the firewall rule would still work if the Windows firewall also protects localhost. I want to continue. So it says that it's going to use the correct Windows user account, which is named admin. Asks for my password, no echo, and it managed to connect correctly to the SSH server. We're now connected to our own computer, to the same computer that we're on, but this time using SSH. And I'm not sure if this is cmd.exe or PowerShell. Let's run a simple PowerShell command to detect if we're inside PowerShell. From the prompt, it's probably cmd.exe, but we'll see. Let's run this PowerShell command, which will output to standard output the PowerShell version. So says that this thing is not recognized. We're inside cmd.exe. Okay, let's see if we can switch to PowerShell, which should be available. Let's run the same command again. We have syntax highlighting. The command works. Let's see if we can exit PowerShell. Control D. Doesn't work. Exit. And we're back inside cmd.exe. Let's run some Windows commands from here. Where, which is the Windows version. What other commands we have available? Let's see, who am I? So I'm the user admin. Where am I? c:\users\admin, which is the home directory of the current user. Let's run some commands in here. Yeah, cmd.exe works if you're only running command line executables and commands. But still, so this means you're not running graphical user interface applications. I'm not sure what happens if you do that. Yeah, probably the UI opens somewhere in the desktop of the services, hopefully. But don't do that, right? When you're connected over SSH, don't start graphical user interface applications. But you can still install additional command line applications if you don't have enough options at your command line on Windows. You can install text user interface file managers in the vein of the MS-DOS Norton Commander or MS-DOS DOS Navigator. Maybe you can also install some open source web browser. And then you have at your disposal all of the command lines that work in cmd.exe. You can enter PowerShell, run a variety of commands there, and you can also install additional REPLs, read, evaluate, print loops for other programming languages. You can install, for instance, Python. I was curious to see if the process Notepad actually was started and was just not available. The graphical user interface was not visible in this screen. Maybe, again, it could run the graphical user interface part of the process inside the desktop of the Windows services. I am using the command line task list space /svc. I cannot find notepad.exe anywhere in here, so maybe there's some security measure or a limitation where if you start the notepad executable inside a SSH connection, the process will exit. It's not that clear why that would happen. Maybe, again, there's a feature implemented in Notepad or a security improvement implemented in OpenSSH Server. Instead of grep, in Windows we have findstr, but I don't remember if findstr is case sensitive or not. Let's now try to connect to the SSH server, but not using localhost. Control D does not work. Exit did work. We're out of the SSH connection. So let's use a command line like this one. So that would be SSH domain, localhost, local domain, / the username, and then and I don't know the name of the operating system. So let's have a new command prompt, find out the IPv4 address. which is this one. Okay, so I'm using ./admin for the domain /username, and then I'm using the IPv4 address of the Ethernet network interface card. Okay, it says that inside the known hosts, we have connected to this computer before, but with the name localhost, not with the name IPv4 address ending with 201. I want to continue. It asks for the password. And the password does not work. Okay, so what's the alternative? Yeah, that was totally unexpected. So ./username doesn't work, but then Windows computer name /username does work. Not expected. Next up, I'm going to install the Sysinternals Suite to have access to additional command line executables. On Google, I search Sysinternals Suite from Microsoft, and I'm interested in the big zip file. So this thing, download Sysinternals Suite, save. And Firefox didn't ask where I want this file to be downloaded to, which is something that I have configured in Firefox and not expected. Cut. Let's have a temporary directory the way I usually do it. So c:\temp directory inside a bin directory. And some of the software that I normally use, I don't actually install it on Windows. It's not available in add remove programs, but I actually unzip it in c:\temp/bin, which is going to be the case with the Sysinternals Suite. And I don't like that I don't have the 7-zip options in there. And extract. So 7-zip is a unzipper application for Windows. It's really small, it's really fast. It has worked correctly since the year 2004. It's the way better alternative to the built-in Windows Explorer extract and compress as zip functionality. Is also better than whatever people were using before, WinRAR, WinZip, all of the other shareware, graphical user interface, compression applications. And it knows more compression algorithms. Okay, so some of these executables have graphical user interface, some don't. We'll run some of these commands from the command line. So let's see how we do that. Let's see if we can copy paste. CD. And it seems to have worked. Let's first look at PS list, which is this guy. So I'm not sure what --help does. Yeah, most of these executables actually wait for you to accept the EULA, which is a bad thing to do. Let's see how we can go around the EULA, we can't. Let's see if minus accept EULA works. Okay, and if we don't specify the command line parameter, so basically for all of the command line only executables, so for all of the Sysinternals Suite executables that don't have graphical user interface, you'll need to accept the EULA by running the command line with the command line parameter minus accept EULA first. So once you run the executable space minus accept EULA once, and then you use the executable as you would usually do. Okay, slash question mark the standard Windows style command line help command line parameter. I want a tree view. So the possibility is minus the command line parameter. Okay, so this is what I actually was after. I wanted an equivalent of the Linux PS3. Both in Windows and in Linux, there exists the concept of process trees. When a process starts another process, starts a sub-process, that sub-process might become a child of the parent process. And we can see a hierarchy of processes. Why this is useful? You can guess some of the processes that belong to the current graphical user interface session that you're using, because those, for instance, in this case, the MS Edge WebView, which is part of the Microsoft Edge web browser, you can see it being a child of WinInit. Okay, and then we're also interested in seeing if most of the processes that we start inside the Windows OpenSSH Server session are using a process hierarchy that has SSHD as the one of the parents. So we can see SSHD spawning another SSHD, and then we're inside cmd.exe because pslist has just exited. So this is the current process. From this process, we have started pslist, and now the tree has changed a bit because pslist has exited, and the current process tree is just this part. This is also showing us that indeed we're not inside PowerShell. But some of the processes are not parented correctly inside the process tree. For instance, Firefox did not actually start from outside the WinInit session of the graphical user interface session that I'm connected into Windows. Yeah, this process tree is useful, but it's not perfect. So we know how to list the running processes. We have pslist, but then there's also the executable that's built into Windows. Let's try to see if we can kill a process. Let's start a notepad. Okay, we can see Explorer and then Notepad with an uppercase N, so strange capitalization there. Let's see if find str actually works to filter the list. So we go note, and find str is case sensitive by default. Let's find out the command line parameter to find str to ignore casing. /I, similar to grep, what I would expect. Okay, so there is a process, notepad, and we want to close it from the SSH connection. We're going to use the executable that's built into Windows that's called taskkill. We want to provide the name of the executable, not the process ID. So we're going to use the first example in the help for taskkill. Copy paste does work. Okay, and it says that notepad.exe could not be terminated. I'm not exactly sure how or why. But let's do what it says in here. Use the -f to force command line parameter to taskkill. So taskkill /f/im notepad.exe. And notepad.exe has been terminated. We managed to kill the process. Okay, so we know how to list processes in two ways using Sysinternals Suite and the built-in Windows tool. We know how to kill processes. We can use both taskkill from Windows, but also pskill from Sysinternals Suite. We know how to navigate the disk. So cd tells you the current directory, similar to pwd in Linux. You can clear the screen, similar to clear in Linux. The command line on Windows is cls. You can create directories. Where? Let's go to directories up once and then twice. cd to see the current path. We can also see the current path in the prompt. We can also see the current user that's connected using SSH in the prompt of cmd.exe. Make directory. Make directory can also create a directory inside the directory if needed. Let's create a directory named A, uppercase. Let's list the current directory dir. So A is there and it's a directory. Change into A, cd uppercase A. We can change using a full path, cd c:\temp. We can change using a full path, maybe, but relative to the current drive. So that's / being the root directory, but the current drive being c:. Okay, we can create files in here, delete files. Let's see how we can create a file. We can, for instance, use edit if it still works. And it does, and it's very modern. Trailing new line. Let's see how we get to file. Usually that was done with F10. And then save, and then F10, and then exit. Control Q, a modern shortcut. Control N, a modern shortcut. Control O and S, modern. Okay, let's list the contents. So edit was similar to opening in Linux your preferred editor, such as Nano. And then we're going to list the contents. That's type, similar to cat in Linux. So type space a.txt will list the contents of the file, and then put a new line, and then return the control back to cmd.exe to show the prompt. We can list the current directory. We can list just this file. There's auto-completion. We can delete the file. There's del. There's rmdir. Since we got here, let's also install a text user interface orthodox twin pane file manager for Windows. I know of this one, again on the old Windows 3.11 for workgroups time with MS-DOS. The classic alternatives were Norton Commander and DOS Navigator, but for Windows, maybe this is the alternative for the command line. So filemanager.com. I have never used this application. Let's see how we can install it. File Manager. I want an archive. I'm going to do the same thing if I can, which is move it to c:\temp/bin and extract it there. Use 7zip to extract. Okay. And then let's do the same thing, which is copy the directory path. Start the file manager, which is file.exe as far as I can see. I don't know why, but it took around 1 minute for the process to start. Maybe it has created all sorts of configuration files for the very first run. Let's see if we can exit. Let's see if the mouse works. So F10 quit. It wrote some interesting characters there. Whoa. F10 quit. So let's keep the mouse out of the action. Var.exe. Tab works. Alt F2 works. Alt F1 works. Alt F7 works. Let's go to the directory where we created our temporary file, c:\temp/a, and then the file is a.txt. F3 the viewer works. F4 the editor works. I'm not sure what's up with this thing. I can put the cursor on characters that don't exist, which is strange. Save F2. I'm not sure if it's saved or not. Exit F4. So I'm following what is down in the function bar. So all of these, help, user, manual, view, edit, copy, etc., can be started, all of these buttons, by pressing the corresponding function key. So this is F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, etc. until F12. Again, keep the mouse out because otherwise it will write inside the file manager command line all sorts of strange characters. With the backspace key, I have deleted whatever was written inside the command line of file manager. Okay, let's see if we can copy files. This guy, F5, copy, tab, F3 to view, F8 to delete. It doesn't delete the file, it's aware of Windows. It's a Windows command line text user interface orthodox file manager. It's not centered around DOS, so it knows how to put a file into the recycle bin. Okay. Yeah, we have a pretty good toolkit at our disposal with a good orthodox file manager and the wealth of command line executables exist in Windows, and the command line executables that come from the Microsoft Sysinternals Suite. Next up, let's try to see if we can connect from Linux towards this SSH server, and then that should be it. Okay, we're inside a Linux computer, Ubuntu 26.04, refresh installation. Let's try to connect using the SSH protocol. The Windows computer name is kind of complicated. Let's see if we can connect without specifying a Windows domain name or a Windows computer name. So just with the local Windows user account, which is named admin, and then the IPv4 address of the computer. And we have the firewall enabled and the SSH rule enabled in the Windows firewall. So just the SSH Edit.exe firewall rule inside Windows firewall was not enough. I actually disabled all of the Windows firewall, all of the 3 profiles, and now we can connect to port TCP22 on the IPv4 address of the Ethernet network interface card on the Windows computer. I don't like that Ubuntu 26.04 now displays a graphical user interface message box when the SSH client asks for passwords, and the fact that the executable KSSH ask pass is involved. I would rather have a text user interface only experience without any graphical user interface dialogues. Please type yes. Wow. Yeah, maybe I have installed something strange on this Linux operating system. Okay, so the big hurdle here was the firewall, the Microsoft Defender firewall, the default firewall that's available in Windows 11 Pro. The rule to allow incoming connections towards the OpenSSH SSH server didn't work for me. Maybe I did something wrong, but just out of the box, the experience was not correct in my case. As expected, the 2 SSH connections keep working and they are totally independent. I'm connected from the Windows machine towards the Windows machine, but also from the Linux machine towards the Windows machine. So 2 separate SSH server sessions. So I have navigated to the directory where I have the Sysinternals Suite installed. I have run the same command line to see the tree of processes, so pslist space -t. And now we should see two different SSHD sessions as trees of processes. So the one running File Manager is the one that started from Windows and went towards the Windows SSH Server, and the one with pslist started from Linux and it's connected to the same Windows 11 Pro with an SSH server. So two different SSH server sessions with two different process trees. Let's start File Manager also here, and then that should be it. So we want to either provide a full path towards File Manager or to switch to the directory, change to the directory where File Manager was archived, unzipped, and start from there far.exe. So backslash where temp autocompletion bin and then the other directory. Cool. So I autocompleted without providing any character, and then we enter this directory, we just run far. The color scheme is wrong in my terminal, which is called console. That's why it looks so strange. And the mouse action works correctly. I could click on the button F4, F10 quit at the bottom inside the function, inside the buttons toolbar. Yes. So this is it. OpenSSH is the default SSH server. It's an open source project, part of the OpenBSD project. Is the backbone of most Linux operating systems. We use SSH on a daily basis, and the same OpenSSH is also available as both server and client inside Windows. More than that, it's pre-installed in Windows. It's available as a Windows feature. It's just not enabled by default. You need to both enable the Windows feature and enable the Windows service. Other than that, you will need to think about the firewall rules. If you're using Windows Firewall, you will need to tinker a bit with its rules to make sure that the SSH client can connect to it. Maybe you want to only be able to connect from the same computer, maybe just from your local area network, maybe from your VPN, etc. So fiddle with the Microsoft Defender with advanced settings firewall until you can connect from the desired computers using the SSH client towards the OpenSSH server running on Windows 11 Pro. Other than that, the experience is as I would expect. Yes, there are some issues. Maybe Windows Terminal plus File Manager with the mouse, there's some glitches there, but those glitches were not present when I have used a Linux operating system with a terminal emulator with the SSH client to connect to the same computer. So mouse worked correctly inside the Orthodox File Manager, Twin Pair File Manager, Text User Interface File Manager, File Manager. So this is it. I am pleased with the decision of Microsoft to include OpenSSH and make it a first class citizen inside Windows, a first party component. Thank you.